Hey guys. So I'm still reeling from the summit. I was here for the whole thing, and it was just amazing. And who was here, by the way? Raise your hand. Wasn't it incredible? And for those of you who were here, you will understand this. Most people, what they've been talking about are Craig Groeschel's muscles. And so I'm here to promise you this morning you won't be distracted by muscles. He brought the six-pack, I brought the keg, and we're just going to sit back and talk about something really, really important. What we're going to look at today is a question that most people ask, whether they know it or not, and all people ask, whether they know it or not. And that is the big question of, so what's God's will for me? What's His purpose? What am I supposed to be doing? So we're going to tackle this question of finding God's will. And to tackle it, we are going to go directly to one of my favorite passages out of the book of Romans, chapter 12, if you want to read it later, because it's one of the only sections of the Bible that actually promises us how to do that. I mean, that's amazing. Everybody's, we're always looking for God's will, right? And have you ever seen people that like, I got to find the will of the Lord. I got to find God's will for my life. I got to find God's will for who I'm going to marry, or what I should do in this relationship or with my business. Anybody had that feeling? We all have that feeling. But a lot of people have that feeling like God's will, it's like they're on an Easter egg hunt. Like, I got to find it. I know maybe it's under the bushes, or maybe He hid it over here and we're trying to find it. And what we're going to see is that the Scriptures show us a path that is involved in finding God's will, that it's not a mystery. Now, God does sometimes make the Easter egg appear. The burning bush or the vision, miraculous moments. I've had those in my life where God literally shows up and He does something to direct us. And many of you have had that, I know. But even when that happens, there's a path. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through Romans 12 and see what it says about that. So I'm going to read you here the first part of it, and we'll jump into a little more later. But it starts like this. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And here it is. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is. His good, pleasing, and perfect will. So let's hop into this. What's the first thing it says? Really interesting. We're all ready to go find God's will, right? And we're ready to jump into it. What am I going to do? What's my next strategy and purpose and all this stuff? And we're ready to do something. But where the chapter starts out is a little bitty phrase. There's only a few words. In view of God's mercy. In view of God's love. What's step one? To be in view of God's love, His mercy. Now, this is interesting, because just a little phrase. Sometimes these little phrases in the Bible, we go over them like speed bumps, and we don't realize that usually a speed bump is tied to a lot of stuff. And you know why in this chapter he only mentions it in 5 words? And here's why. He just spent 11 chapters talking about it. Now, I cannot overemphasize the importance of this. Here's most of our problems in life, the whole human race really, is that we try to do things, we try to perform, we try to do stuff in order to get love. We have a performance orientation in life. Now, this isn't just spiritual gobbledygook here. This goes all the way to neuroscience. This goes to the way that humans are formed. I can tell you as a psychologist, the most important factor, and we heard it through the summit, in various ways. The most important factor to human performance is something psychologists call secure attachment. To be grounded relationally in secure love. If you take a baby and you bring them home or, wherever they go, and you feed them and water them, it's a good thing, right? But if they're not loved, we know this from sometimes kids that are raised in institutions, they're fed and watered, but they're not loved, they don't have a secure attachment. You take pictures of their brain later, brain scans, and there are literal black holes up there where wiring was supposed to form circuitry to what? To do stuff, to perform with their gifts, to negotiate life. The wiring doesn't form without secure attachment. And then what we know later is the performance cycle itself best performs when we don't have to worry about whether or not we're going to be loved. A marriage to perform well has got to have a bedrock of security in the attachment. It's not going away and it's not going to stop loving me. A parent and a child, a business, what we found throughout the summit, over and over and over, speakers said, if you want to fuel your teams and you want to fuel people to performance, they must know that you're with them and that they are secure in your love and your support, because it fuels everything. Not going to spend a lot of time on this. I just want you to go back and read the 11 chapters before, because what Paul does is he's telling the whole world. Right when the church started out, he wanted to let them know this is not another religion. This is something totally different. Give up your efforts to get to God and just trust in His love, because that's how it's all going to work. So, I want you to think about that first. But that's not what this passage tries to unpack. What this passage unpacks is the path of how we go in that. Love is the highway. That path of life is God's love. But we got to find a lane in that highway. Everybody's got a different lane. I'm from LA. We have 42 lanes. You can't see them because, the air, but we have a lot of lanes. So here's the thing. When we are going to go into that love, there's a step we have to take first. And that step is that next verse where he says, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true sense of worship. So what does it mean to present yourself? Well, it means basically we surrender. Now, many of you have made that initial surrender to God, right? Remember that day? I remember mine. Sometimes we do it kind of like because we realize that God is real, or somebody shares with us He's real. A lot of times we come to it because we surrender, like the war of life finally gets us to wave the white flag. That's what happened to me. When I was in college and I hit the bottom, you've heard me tell this story if you've been here when I've told it. And it was bad. I mean, it was really bad. I was so depressed, I could not function. I had gone to college. I'd been recruited there to play golf, and I had a hand injury, and I didn't play well, and the pain was so bad I couldn't play well. And finally, after a couple of years, the pain, and they couldn't fix it, and so I had to quit. I had to break up with a girlfriend. I didn't know what I was going to study. And my life, I talk about not knowing God's will for the next step. I didn't know it because I didn't even really know God. So I'm sitting there one day, and I look up on the shelf, and there's my Bible that I hadn't read since I'd been there at college. Some of you can probably relate to that. And I picked it up, and I sat down, and I didn't even know where I was turning. I didn't know enough about the Bible to find anything. But I opened it up, and this verse just jumped off the page. You've heard people say that. It just kind of went and jumped off the page. And here's what it said. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you as well. What it was saying to me was, if I'm trying to find God's purpose, His will, what He wants, what I'm supposed to do, how do you make a relationship work? How do you find her? How do you find out what you're supposed to do. How do I get out of this depression? It said to seek him first. And so what I did was I walked across the campus there at SMU, and I walked into an empty church, and I walked down to the altar, and I said, God, I don't even know if you're here. I don't even know if you exist, really. Which is kind of funny, right? You're talking to somebody, telling them they don't exist. Which something was wrong with that from the beginning, but that's what I said. And so I said, I don't know if you're there, but if you're there, I really need help. And I surrender, God. I'll do whatever you want me to do. So I just surrendered. Now, I was hoping to get zapped. I was hoping the miracle. You see these people on TV, and nothing happened. And I'm going to tell you, it's the loneliest moment that I have ever experienced, because I actually turned my life over to God, and it seemed like he wasn't there. And I don't know many people that won't say that in the deepest moments of what they needed to surrender, in a black hole, a desperate moment in a marriage or in a business, and they finally surrendered, most of them will tell you that it is a deep, dark place. And sometimes immediately you don't see God show up. That's what happened to me. So I'm standing there, I'm not getting any zapping, and I said, okay, well, call me, And so I go back to my dorm room, and right after that, a fraternity brother of mine called me, and he said, I don't know why I thought of inviting you, but, we're starting a Bible study, and I thought I would invite you, see if you wanted to come. I said, yeah, I do want to come. And I went, and that's when it began for me. There was a surrender. And for all of us, whether you are at that first day where you've never made that first surrender to find out who God is or anything, we have to make that one. But as this verse says, what I found later was we go surrender, but we're not like a sacrifice. In the Jewish culture, they would take an animal and sacrifice them, right? Kill the animal, put them on the altar, sacrifice them, and you got a dead animal, sacrifice. And usually you don't hear a lot of feedback from the animal. They're just kind of done. Here's the thing. When Paul says present your bodies as a living sacrifice, that's an ongoing, we're living. And what I find about finding God's will, even now, however many years later, since I was in college, 6 years ago, just see if you're awake. It is a living sacrifice at every day. And here's the problem with a living sacrifice. Unlike the dead one, the living one always starts to crawl off the altar. When God asks us to do something that is going to help us find his purpose and his will and his desire, sometimes it gets, as we're going to see, sometimes it gets uncomfortable. We want to crawl off. But I'm here to promise you that most 99, 100% of the time, for us to find something good, we've usually got to go through some kind of strain. And that's when we want to give up on the surrender, but it's when we need to surrender the most. So this surrender piece is a big, big deal. And I want to say one more thing about this. In the passage, it says, present your bodies. Now, here's the deal. It's hard to present your body if you're not present, right? Woody Allen, the great theologian, he said, 88% of life is showing up. I got a friend, good friend, Christian. He says, you know what, sometimes though, I'd rather be on the golf course thinking about God on Sunday morning than being in church thinking about golf. Started trying to find that passage, and I understood that, but I'm telling you, in the big picture, and I know there's different times, but in the big picture, you know what, we got to jump in somewhere. Whatever it is we're going to find, as we'll see, the guy wants us to do, we got to bring our bodies. If you want to find out his will in a marriage, you got to show up. You want to find out His will in parenting, we do have to show up. And there is a big, bring the whole package, all of you, heart, mind, soul, and strength. So there's this surrender piece, and it's all of us. Now, you ready for it to get hard? It's really hard from here on out for a little while, and then it gets better, but you're with the shrink, you're on the couch, so we're going to go deep. Because we're ready now, right? We are ready to go do it. Now, here's what I found out about God, that God kind of like, it's not really a bait and switch, but it's, think about what Jesus did. Follow me, and he says, I'll give you life, abundant life. Come on, guys, follow me. And then they get a little further into it, and he says, oh, yeah, there's one thing, I'm going to die, and you're going to die. And they go, no, not you, Lord. And he says, there's this suffering piece. But then he says, don't worry, because then we'll be resurrected. It's not that we jump into immediately finding God's will. When you say, God, who do you want me to be with, or what do you want me to do, or what's my strategy? I'll say yes to it. Well, guess what? Here's what the passage says. The passage does not say the next step is a yes. The next step is a say no. Say no. Listen to this. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to determine His will. So what is this saying no thing? How many of you have toddlers or have had toddlers? Do you remember, that secure attachment thing I was talking about? That abiding love? And they hung out for that first year and everything was great. And then all of a sudden, this little terrorist shows up. That's what happened. You keep feeding them and watering them, and they turn into terrorists. And they go into this phase where they were saying yes before, yes to love, right? And then all of a sudden, it doesn't matter what you say to them. What do they say? No. Come on, I want you to, no. And they're like, no. I used to love to just, with my girls, when they were toddlers, I'd go, do this or do that. And they're going, no. And I'd go, breathe. They go, no. I'd say, I got you, and you don't even know it. See? But that's what they do. Now, why do they do that? Here's what's interesting about the development of a human. And God grows a human just like He grows an eternal being after you come to Him. See, God doesn't do a rehab job with us. He does a start over, born again, and then we start over. And we go through the stages. What happens with the baby after that first year or so of secure attachment? What's the next function in life they learn? They learn how to say no. Now, it is one of the, after saying yes to love, being able to say no is one of the most important functions as a human being. You look at infants, they basically have, before they can talk, if there's something good, they kind of nod and their body nods. If something bad, they have this instinctual no. The yes and no is part of the image of God. So what does this have to do with finding God's will? Because what we know about humans is, in our connections, in our love, we've also got to be able to say no and find out who we are as individuals. And what Paul says in this passage is, if we're going to find God's will, we must say no. Do not conform to the patterns of this world. And what we know about, the way we get formed is we have pressures from the world and its system, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the boastful pride of life, and also the pressures from the fallen world that we live in. And I'm going to tell you where 103% of those begin. And it begins in those early stages where we're growing up and we're learning about our no muscle. One of the worst things I have ever heard in child rearing, advice for parents, is that you've got to break the will of that child. Are you kidding me? Will means In the Greek, in God's word, all the way through it, will, the word will means desire. And when you're seeing a kid exert their will, that is their desire and passion to stand up that's ultimately going to be able to will against death, against evil, and will for good. And desire it and will it. Now, does that mean we let the little terrorists run the house? No. And God doesn't want to let us run our house either, of finding His will in our business or in our marriage or anywhere else. Because what do you do with a toddler? You don't break that will, you discipline that will. And discipline in the Bible, the word means to instruct and to form. And what we have to do with kids, just like we have to do with adults and just like God has to do with us, He wants us to be strong and passionate, but He wants us to learn how to say no to the pressures that are trying to shape us and form us and tell us what their will for our life is. Some of you, your marriage is off track or your business is off track. Let's just start with the family because the parents have too much control as adults. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands because your spouse will, nudge you. But I know so many people that they want to do this or they want to do that, or so many couples that want to do this, but mom or dad won't like it. Or the circle of friends won't like it. Many of you have come to Willow Creek and you're getting involved with God and the spiritual lights are going on. And you've got communities of friends around you, which are good friends, but their view of God or church or whatever is, and they're saying, what are you doing that for? You know, all those Christians, they're all hypocrites. And we all know that, it's just most of us, but not all of us are hypocrites. But you get that pressure. And some of you have a dream that God has birthed. And you got to say no to whoever's trying to form you and shape you into something else. It could be family, it could be friends, it could be extended family. But there's not a story in the Bible and there's not a story in real life where God took somebody's life and turned it around, where forces did not come against them to try to resist that, whether it's getting an addict into rehab or whether it's turning a company around. We cannot find God's will if we can't say no to the things that aren't His will, even good-meaning people. Got any golfers in here? Yeah? What's wrong with the rest of you guys? So I grew up a competitive golfer. Jack Nicklaus was my guide before I found Jesus. And Nicklaus was the greatest ever. More major championships still than anybody. Nobody's caught up with him yet. And about a month ago, I'm watching something on sports, and it's the show's an interview with Jack Nicklaus about his life and his career. And so they go back to childhood, and they're asking about his family and how he grew up. And Nicklaus's father was a huge, Ohio State fan and sports fan and all this, and they were really big in all this. And his father was a huge supporter of his golf. And he had him a teacher, his name was Jack Grout from early on, and all of this, and just very, very supportive. So the interviewer's asking Jack about that. And he says, well, how'd your father's influence work and all this? And he said, he's very supportive. But then he said, when I think it was 18, leading the U.S. Amateur, the first major tournament that he would win, I'm pretty sure I got the facts right on this. He's leading that tournament. After the third round, they're having dinner. And he said, my dad said to me, why'd you hit that 6-iron on number 13 or that sandwich? Or why'd you make that decision out there on that hole? Puts his fork down, he looks his dad in the eye and says, Dad, it's my game. It's my game. So many people are not finding the Nicklaus inside of them in their own feels and passions because somebody's trying to tell you who to be or how they want you to play the game of life. And it's time today to put a name on that person and look them in the eye and say, I know you love me, I know you want this for me, but I got to go in a different direction. And that sometimes can be a whole company that you lead. But we have to be able to do that. Okay, so I tell you it's going to get hard. Now I got you calling your in-laws and a bunch of stuff. All right, now you ready for this? It's going to get harder. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So we're going to say no to everything. We're going to empty ourselves first, and then we're going to say no to all this stuff. And then we're going to say, okay, God, so if you're single, who do I marry? Or if you're in business, who do I hire? Or what should my strategy be? Or this, that, and the other. Guess what he says next? Not going to tell you. And you know why he's not going to tell you? Because we're out of our mind. He says we got to have our mind transformed. It's interesting. When I was studying this passage, I looked up the Greek word here for mind, and what it means is not just your thinking, it's everything. It's your emotions. It's your patterning. It even uses the word to follow desires and how you judge good from evil and helpful from destructive. We got to be transformed. Now, what does this have to do with knowing God's will? I'll tell you a story. I was consulting with a board, and they were about to hire a new CEO. And so I'm in the meetings, and this guy had made it down to the last interview before the board, and he just wowed him. He had this big vision and all this stuff, and on and on. And I'm sitting there listening to him, and I'm watching around the room. The board's getting all enamored with this guy. And he had a lot of strengths. He had a lot of talents. He had a lot of brains. But I felt like I wanted to go take a shower. The guy was there was something slimy. Have you ever felt that? Like, I'm just getting sold something here. And so, they asked him to go outside, and the board wanted to discuss it for a minute. Everybody's like, hey guys, whatever we got to pay, we got to get this guy. And everybody's like, yeah, because on and on. I said, stop. I said, guys, listen to me. He is not okay. I promise you he's not okay. They go, what are you talking about? I said, let me ask him one question. We call him back in. I said, can you tell me a little bit about what some of your weaknesses are and how they would affect you in this role and how they would affect this organization and kind of how you work with those? He looks at me like with a blank stare, like he has no clue what I'm talking about. I said, your weaknesses, things you don't do well. And you can see, he knows he's in an interview, so he's got to say something. So he says, well, I guess my biggest weakness is, I'm just real achievement-oriented, and I perform, and sometimes I leave people behind. I said, oh, I'm sorry, I thought that was a strength, performing. Can you tell me a weakness? He goes, well, I said, no, that's a strength. Tell me your weaknesses. Tell me what He literally couldn't. So we wanted to talk a little more, and we sent him out of the room, and I said, guys, put me in the minutes. I am voting no. If this guy's never made a mistake, you're going to be his first one. They hired him. About a year and a half later, they had to fire him. He had taken them into a hole that was so bad, it took him 4.5 years to get out. Because in all of his achievement, he couldn't listen, and he drove them in a bunch of stuff. But you know what? They couldn't find the will of God in this situation because they didn't know what to look for. Their minds had not been transformed. They were they had blind spots and easily fall in love. Have you ever all of you single people, how many of you, and we won't even say the last one because he or she might be sitting 2 rows over, but how many of you have ever made some bad decisions in dating? Okay? Even you married people before, not now, but how many of you had to go through a few train wrecks? Okay? Well, the Bible says that. It says solid food like marriage or hiring a CEO or finding a strategy for a business or raising kids. Solid food is for the mature who, through practice, have had their senses trained to discern good from evil. Exactly what this verse says, having our mind transformed. Have you ever known, you see people fall in love, single people fall in love all the time, and because they're out of their minds. Out of their minds, right? They're at a party. There's 30 or 40, let's say she's there. Now she just happens to be the daughter of an alcoholic. This happens to men too, but I'll pick on her for a minute. She's at the party. She's the daughter of an alcoholic. She keeps picking the same type over and over, same guy, different name. It's in a pattern, but there's always this type that gets her going, right? She's at a party. There's 30 or 40 good guys standing all around her. She's been talking to. Doesn't feel any butterflies yet because they have jobs. And she's standing there, and there's all these good people. She does not have the eyes to see because she's out of her mind. And what happens is he walks in across the room. She looks at him. Ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. She is in love. She doesn't know what it is, but she feels that electricity. All the ones with jobs, yeah, they're nice. You know, I love them, but I'm not in love with them. You've heard that, right? And she runs off, and she dives into his arms forever because she's found the one. She doesn't know him or his parole officer yet. But she's so sure, and we don't know what we don't know until we get into the growth path of God transforming our minds. And the very first thing he does is he gets us into his ways. You know, we don't have to know the specifics of finding God's will because a lot of his will is told to us about how to do things. We heard at the summit, very, 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 very powerful story from Horst Schulz, who was the founder of the Ritz-Carlton. If you want to build the premier hotel brand in the world, what do? He told us what he did. He had his mind transformed, and he built that hotel chain through the ways of God. He had his mind transformed by God's ways. Micah 6:8 says this, that if you want to figure out what God wants from us, he says, he's already told you. He wants you to love mercy, do justice, and walk humbly with God. And so what he told us about the Ritz-Carlton was, he told that we're not in the hotel business, we're in the loving people, caring for people, serving people business. And we're going to do justice. We promise him this, we're going to deliver it. We're going to do what's right. And we're going to go the extra mile. And he learns God's ways. And we see this so many places where people align their businesses with God's ways because they're learning that God's ways are about not overpowering and oppressing employees, to helping people, to coaching them, not to spanking them with anger, but to disciplining them, which means to coach and to build into them